everyone to day one of Conscious Life Expo, which is now celebrating 10 years. Are some of you here for the first time? Are some of you veterans? Yeah, this is an amazing event, and you've come to the right lecture tonight. This is going to be extremely fascinating with Erik Poltorak, and he is an expert of Zecharia Sitchin's work, who probably know is a genius and has written 14 books, told an exciting new story of the human origins. And this workshop is going to examine Sitchin's best evidence for astonishing history of planet Earth. There will be DVDs available after, downstairs at the bookstore. And also, please note the post-conference workshops on Monday that will be happening with a lot of the incredible speakers. And also, please note the 2012 Mayan cruise that's going to happen December 17th through 21st that the Conscious Life Expo is sponsoring. So now I want to warmly welcome Erik Poltorak. He worked with Zecharia for 10 years as his webmaster and assisted his seminar coordinator and traveled with him to numerous countries and states. So please welcome Erik Poltorak.
Thank you. Okay, we're starting in just a moment, but that's a good indication that everybody should turn their phones off to either silent or airplane mode. I hate it when I'm the one who didn't turn the phone off.
So we're going wireless on the handheld and on the lapel?
Check. I think we should look at that one.
Okay with this? Okay.
Yeah, we're rolling.
You're rolling? Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Conscious Life Expo, and I want to thank you for coming to this presentation on Zecharia Sitchin's best evidence. We don't have a lot of time to cover all the things he wrote about in over 14 books, and those 14 books were translated in over 26 languages and sold over 25 million copies. In almost every version of 12th Planet in a different language, it becomes a bestseller in the country that it's in. I was one of those lucky people to be able to call Zecharia a friend, a mentor, a travel partner, and a boss, and most importantly of all, an inspiration. Zecharia was a person who left this planet with a lot more knowledge and in a lot better state than when he came. He had a unique opportunity, and he made the most of it by gathering knowledge, writing about it, and making it available to the general audience. And it was his own quest to find our common origins and to answer questions, which we all have. The questions of who are we? Where do we come from? What information is there in the past that indicates that some of the things we've been told are incorrect, slightly wrong, absolutely wrong, or even more incredible and fantastical than we even thought? And the information that we're going to see is going to cover a wide range of area, a long time span, and we're going to talk about that. Zechariah's main thesis. Well, first of all, let me start from this. This is a picture from the British Museum in London, England, taken in 1999 when I went on my first trip with Zecharia. And he's pointing out here that there's zodiac symbols on these tablets, and including up here, there's a winged disc symbol. These kind of symbols and motifs are all over the ancient tablets and stelas, and they spent a lot of time making sure that you can clearly see them. They were prominent pictures, and they all had specific meanings. It wasn't just decoration. Zecharia found through the evidence that our civilization, our culture, our religions had a much older source of information and a starting point. And in fact, we all jointly together share that common source. Even though we all have different directions now, at some point in the past, they were much more united. So one concept of his thesis is that a lot of older influence and ancient material came into our civilization and we absorbed it. It became part of our culture. And we're going to look at some of those. More fantastic things than even we realize until we look at it from the detail point of view. Another part of his thesis is that, in fact, the ancients were telling the truth. And a lot of their stories, which we call mythology, stories of gods interacting with them, stories of incredible flights and what some people call miracles, what I actually call technology. And Zecharia showed that not only were these stories more true than false, but the beings that they talked about, these god beings, were real life, flesh and blood characters who were not born on Earth, and they were not humans. Therefore, these beings were extraterrestrials, aliens, involved with ancient humans, involved in wars, daily life activities, teaching humans how to cultivate, giving them survival skills, and passing down advanced knowledge. Now, if this stuff is true, we have to have corroborating evidence in different areas that will indicate to us. We'll see some of that today. Because the evidence that I picked for today, which by the way is a very short lecture, to be able to present Zechariah's best evidence in 90 minutes is impossible. So it's the best, most important pieces that I picked up, and this really is only part one of a series of parts of lectures that describes his best evidence. And part two has not been scheduled yet. Okay, is that clear? Todd, is that clear? I think we need lights down a little bit more. This is me on top of the Pyramid of the Moon in the city called Teotihuacan, right near Mexico City. The pyramid in the background, the big one, is called the Pyramid of the Sun. Teotihuacan means the city where men became gods. And in the ancient days, this walkway could have been filled with water and reflected up into the heavens. And they have objects on the ground there that match all of the planets that we know about. And the evidence for Zechariah's thesis is all around the world. Of course, this lecture is going to cover specific areas, mainly Mesopotamia, and we'll see where most of the stuff we're going to look at tonight is found. It was heartbreaking for me to take out 50 slides to 100 slides that I can't show because of time limitations. There's so much more that I don't have here that is available, but we only have a limited time. I was lucky enough, when I first heard Zechariah, it was in 1998 to 99. I heard him on Art Bell's show. He was on the first hour of Art Bell, and he was talking about these things that I was familiar with. The word Elohim from the Bible in Hebrew, meaning gods, plural. And the word Nephilim in Hebrew, mistranslated as giants for thousands of years. And how these beings came down. And so I had an instant connection to Zechariah's material because I was brought up researching and reading the Bible in Hebrew, in its language, and learning from the language how to translate instead of learning from the English and trying to figure out what they mistranslated. So I had an instant connection to what Zechariah was teaching about and writing about. Now, of course, let me comment that Zechariah passed away in October 2010, October 9th, which is going to become a Sitchin study day. And hopefully in different cities there'll be events that will cover some of this information, and we'll have hopefully presentations. It's not completely organized now, but with the family we're working on organizing that for the future. I really miss Zechariah. I really feel the loss for me personally, and I know I'm going to feel it for decades. Because I worked with him daily, weekly, for 10 years. Before he had a website, I was the one, well, I didn't convince him, but the whole group of people convinced him, and we put up a website, and we did that for 10 years. And then I was his seminar coordinator, and I traveled with him all over the U.S. and all these seminars that we did for full weekends at a time, traveled with him to 4 countries, went alone with him on some travels to, somebody mentioned ARE in Virginia Beach. He spoke at the Edgar Cayce Foundation. I went with him on that trip. So I had a lot of personal time with him, and it was incredible access to a man of such great knowledge and a man who retained so much information that it was just, it's like a walking encyclopedia. And he was very generous and gracious, except when you had to ask questions, you would have to do it in written form. That's an old joke from all the trips. So I also was asking the questions, who are we? Where do we come from? Where's religions from? I knew that the Judeo-Christian religions, the Bible, was not the most recent books that were found on this planet. There was much older. They had influences. So now we digress. Back to ourselves. Looking at Earth above the barren moon, we notice that first of all, what a beautiful planet. All the life we have here, 100 million species. Animals, plants, insects, all types of life living in all areas of our planet. In the coldest, in the hottest, in the driest, in the wettest. Down parts of the ocean that life can't even survive. Extremophiles. The moon, barren, desolate, can't support any life and no vegetation. And yet, our planet is not even 0.1% of the mass of our solar system. Yet everything from history is from here. Everybody that you know in a historical story is here. If this thing works, there it is. It's a very, very small little speck of dust that for us is our major, most important place in the world or in the universe. We are in a galaxy that's 100,000 light years across. That means it takes light 100,000 years to cover the end of our galaxy. And we live in a fairly big galaxy. They estimate that there's 200 to 300 billion stars or more in our galaxy alone. And I showed you the Hubble Deep Field before we started that has 4,000 galaxies. They're now estimating multiple billions to tens of billions of galaxies. All of these are so numerous that to imagine that, first of all, that we're alone is kind of ridiculous. But second, to think that we are the first evolution of living sentient beings when there's been completed galaxies in existence for 12 to 15 billion years. There's an article that was from scientists that estimated when they found the 100th exoplanet, that's the 100th planet orbiting another star outside of our star Sol. When they had reached 100 in the galaxy, they estimated that that made them get to a calculation of 30 billion Earth-type planets were in our galaxy, the Milky Way. But now the amount of exoplanets is 707. I just went with my daughter Rebecca to the Griffith Park Observatory, checked the planet count before I came here, and we're up to 707 planets that are found outside of other stars. So if the estimate was 30 billion Earths when there was 100 exoplanets, well, then maybe the estimate's double, 60 billion. I'll be conservative. It's only gone up to 60 billion possible Earth-type planets. So normally I ask, then why is it so hard to believe that anybody has come here in the past? But I think the audience in this kind of expo already predominantly believes that aliens have already achieved coming to Earth. The thing that Zecharia studied, the thing that I like to study, is their evidence that they came in the past. Because in the past is where the data is. And the data that we're looking up is the type of data that is the best possible data. Okay? The data that we're talking about here, everything we're going to see that's part of evidence is in this category of class 1 or type 1 data. That's consistent and verifiable by others. It's predictable. It's scientific. Okay? There's something to study. When I show you a picture of a piece in a museum, you can go to that museum and you can see that piece. If I show you a piece of a text or a tablet, if it's in a university museum, and if I know where it is, I'll let you know where it is. You can physically go to there and see it for yourself. Now, if a professor wrote a report on a tablet that he dug up and translated, that would be here under class 1 data once removed, because he's studying something real. And just because something's behind the museum glass and you can't touch it, it's still type 1 data because the archaeologist, the professor, he examined it, he touched it. Okay? Type 2 data is multiple witness testimony, but there is nothing left to study. Like many people see a shooting star. It's in the sky, we believe it, it's true. But the thing is, for example, many people see a car accident. That's not type 2, because the car accident will leave tracks behind, evidence of impacts and streaks on the ground and tire marks. So type 2 has multiple witnesses, but there's nothing to study. The only type of data that has something to study is type 1. Type 3 data is a personal witness testimony only and nothing left to study. That is in the area of a lot of UFO contact cases and other strange phenomena that appear to single people. It doesn't mean the information is incorrect, and it doesn't mean a person's lying. But there's no way to prove to another human being what they saw in their head or if it was real or not. So that evidence has to be taken in the correct weighting versus multiple witnesses and then versus scientific or testable data. Type 4 data is a lack of data. I've never seen it, and therefore I don't believe it. In my case, I give here, I've never seen my car upside down in the parking lot. Now, of course, I've seen the news and tornadoes all over the Midwest, and there's cars flipped around like a deck of cards. There, I see it. But that's in the realm of people with UFOs as well, because if they haven't seen it, they don't believe if anybody else saw it. Yet millions of people may have seen something. So that's a lack of data, and it affects a person that if they haven't seen it personally, then they won't believe it. Type 5 data here is intuition, that you have a feeling about something, like gamblers, or when I was a stockbroker, sometimes we could feel the way stocks or investments would move. Some people have intuition. You feel somebody's calling you, or you think of somebody and they call you. That happens every day. Who's thinking of who first? Them, you, or you to them? That's still the big mystery. There's other types of data, but it doesn't pertain to our presentation today. So everything we're going to see is class 1 data, and hopefully you on yourselves can figure out a way to go and see the information for yourselves. This is one type of data that information comes from the ancient peoples. This is literally a library shelf full of tablets in a museum in Turkey that's just sitting there. And when the archaeologists dug up the king's libraries, that's what they would find a lot of the times, unless it was smashed or destroyed by war or earthquake. You would find a tablets on a shelf, and the front of the shelf would have a library card. And it would list everything that's going to be on the shelf, so they would know if a piece was missing or not. Now most of these tablets, oh, by the way, the amount of tablets found in the area that we're talking about, almost 1 million tablets. Some people think even up to 1 million. Most of them are administrative tablets, like, I sold you some sheep, traded me some barley. That was a transaction like a receipt. They wrote it down in a stone clay, and they transferred it. They sent letters with little stone envelopes, little clay envelopes. Everything that they did survived forever. Because, well, who thinks this piece of paper is going to last more than a couple years? These tablets are 4,000 to 6,000 years old. These are the originals. These are what the scribe wrote. This is not a copy of a tablet. This is what the scribe wrote. So we have the originals. That's what professors and archaeologists study. And they're just sitting. I don't even know if all these are translated. They're just sitting in this Turkey museum. My mother-in-law took this picture many years ago on a trip with Zecharia. So that's one type of evidence, which is the text and the stories found in the written record. Okay, that's a textual part of evidence. Another type of evidence is visual, a recording of a picture, of an event. In this case, the Victory Stela of Naram Sin, who was an Akkadian king in the year 2300 BC. Okay. So Naram Sin is one of these god beings, and you could tell one way because he's wearing a horned hat. It's a typical motif that they use to describe their gods. Another thing, notice he's leading a group of people. They're following him. Now, are these warriors? Are these religious people going on a pilgrimage? This object is pretty prominent, this cone object. Are they praying to this object? Are they fearful of this object? Are they going to war against this object? It's a typical motif in the ancient world to see this type of conical object. And in the sky here, we have star symbols or sun symbols. We have symbols that have petals on them, and counting the petals will tell us where and what astronomical body we think they were referring to. So these are common pieces of the type of evidence that we're looking at. Textual evidence that's in the form of writing or cuneiform writing, and then there's pictures. Along with pictures is cylinder seals, which are little tiny pictures. This is the timeline. So now we've seen two types of the way evidence that we study to figure out if this thesis is correct or not, and give it weight of type 1. This is a Malta Museum historical timeline. In Malta, they have temples, 23 of them above ground, and 1 is underwater, that they believe match the oldest structures on Earth. In Malta, they believe that their temples are older than the Great Pyramids, older than the Ziggurat of Ur. Up here, Gigantea, 3600 BC. Now remember this 3600 year number. This number is called a shar in Sumerian, and it's an important number. Well, let's just talk about our relative place in history. We are actually past this at 2012 AD. The time of Jesus is the 0 AD. The time of Abraham is 2000 BC. So we're 2,000 years from Jesus. 2,000 years before that is Abraham, and most of the tablets and information and pictures we're going to look at are from this era from 2000 back to 3600 BC. Before Abraham, that's 4,000 to 5,000, 6,000 years ago from us. Yet the universe is 12 to 15 billion years old. And we're talking about history that's going back 5,000, 6,000 years. It's a mismatch. Obviously, there's huge billions of years of history somewhere on somebody's planet or somebody's different galaxy. Here's some of the major events. Acropolis of Athens, 600 BC. Stonehenge here is given as 2000 BC. Colosseum of Rome is 70 AD. So when we talk about old evidence and influences to our earliest cultures, we're talking about as old as possible in the form of writing. And that's what we're going to see. These are the people who left behind most of the information that we're seeing. We're seeing the Sumerian people. They're really called Sumerians, but the British archaeologists liked Sumer because it flowed off the tongue better. In the Bible, Sumer is called a Shinar. It means the land of the guardians. All of these are citizens of Sumer, except for this guy here. This is Gudea, the last great Sumerian king of the empire before it finally fell. And they're usually shown, the people, in a reverence to their gods with their hands cupped over, showing respect. They were very religious people, and they personally believed that the gods lived within them. The gods lived in their midst. They were able to communicate, talk to them, ask questions. And we're going to find out if we believe some of the history that they left behind, if we agree with it. So that's who left the tablets. Now this is where most of the tablets and pictures were found. Okay, this is the area of Iraq right now, and Iran and Syria. This is the Tigris and Euphrates River coming up from the Gulf. The oldest settlements are in the bottom here, Eridu and Ur, and Uruk. Eridu, by the way, the home in the far away, is one of the prototype names for the word earth. Through thousands of years of spoken language, we will see how accents change. And letters like a da becomes a ta. And a ha becomes a ka. I'll show you some perfect examples. Uruk, which is in Hebrew Erik, which is probably the form of my name Erik, came from that. Gilgamesh was the king there. Here's Babylon, Sippar, and Nippur, important centers, all the way up to Assyria, Nineveh, places that the Bible mentioned. This is the area where most of the tablets and pictures and stelas were found. But they were also found in Syria, and in Israel, and in Egypt, and in Mexico, and in Bolivia, and in Peru. And so we're actually, when you compare the information, you're looking at a worldwide body of evidence left behind all over. The most famous is probably like the structures, the pyramids and the temples. So this is where most of them are found, the ones that we're going to discuss today. This is a graph of progression of pictographic writing, which was the first form of writing that became cuneiform. What's important here is that when you find, or when the archaeologists find a tablet in a certain language, they know how old it is compared to the other languages and what time frame it's in, because this was written after this. Pictographic writing, before the scribe turned it sideways, is older than this one. So in the beginning, pictures were used to tell stories and describe situations. Here was the symbol for earth. The name for earth is Ki. Right now there's a big thing where earth is called Gaia, Mother Gaia. That comes from the Sumerian Ki. Okay? In Sumerian, the word for mountain is Kur. In Hebrew, it's Har. So Ka becomes Ha. And we're going to see how these small changes in accents, or probably something that the scribe may have made a mistake, how these small changes led to big mistranslations thousands of years down the road. Because if you think about me telling you you can't do something, and the scribe leaves out the word can't, it just became you can do something. Anything of a positive negative can be flipped 180 degrees by one change of a word. Lu was how they called man. Lu is still a man's name today. A mixed-up man is Lulu. The Sumerians called us Lulu Amelu, mixed-up beings. They used the term first. It's funny, I saw that Lulu cartoon in the newspaper the other day, and it reminded me of that. A lot of things happen like that. You'll see that terms that were used thousands of years ago are still being used today. And a lot of other things inherited. So the progression is from a pictographic to a sideways, to more of a cuneiform as it starts to become more of letters and sounds, phonetic values, versus the pictures. This is a timeline of written languages on Earth, according to the book that I got this from, which is Andrew Robinson, The Story of Writing. The oldest form of complete writing is Sumero-Akkadian cuneiform. Now, there is pieces of fragments of writing in different forms, linear A, linear B, Indus Valley script, but it's not complete. It's not civilization complete. And when I say civilization complete, I mean almost 1 million tablets. That's extremely rare. And also multiple tablets in different languages and different cultures with different names that are telling the same stories. All of these are rare. But what happens is you get the influences and we see what leads to what. So this is our modern age down here. In the beginning, Sumero-Akkadian cuneiform led into Egyptian hieroglyphics, and they share a lot of the same names and symbol sounds. Later on, Canaanite, Proto-Sinaitic. Here's the most important one for us. Early Phoenician, which created the names of the letters, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, A, B, C, D, also created the sounds of what those letters mean. A, Ba, Ga, for example, came from Phoenician. So when you look at early and Old Hebrew and early and Old Arabic, it's actually Phoenician letters and Phoenician sounds. It's later on that Aramaic script, which was the change of the letters, came about. So old and ancient documents are mostly found in Phoenician, which directly came out of Sumero-Akkadian and the Proto-Sinaitic Canaanite languages. So again, it tells you a time frame when they find something in a language of when it was written. It's not that much guessing work, because most of it is established now from the official timeline. And here's an example of Phoenician leading into Hebrew, and then into Arabic. Here's the names that Phoenician called it. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav. The sounds of the letters, this is the phonetic sounds. So this mem here is a ma sound. That's what it looks like in Hebrew. That's Phoenician. Here's a teth sound. Samech. So all the letters in the Semitic forms had an older root. And now I knew that I was on the path to finding out where religions came from, where people came from, and where stories came from. Because when you can trace back words through the cultures and through the thousands of years, now you have a good place to start and finding out what the sources are. And all of this has just been background to set up to show you that we're talking about a gigantic body of knowledge. This is a table of contents from a book, History Begins at Sumer. It's actually 39 firsts recorded in Sumer's history by Samuel Noah Kramer. He was one of the preeminent Sumerologists of last century. Zecharia called him his mentor. In the stories that Samuel Noah Kramer translated, he found the first cases in history of recordings of the first schools. That's education. The first type of governments. In that case, it was a bicameral Congress, the kind that we have. The first social reforms, tax reductions, law codes, which is the Moses phenomenon of giving rules and punishment. Justice, legal precedents, farming, agriculture, philosophy. This philosophy is important too, and the ethics. All of these came from this culture between 2000 and 4000 BC. And the ones that are most important for our daily life is biblical parallels, stories that seem to be Bible stories, but they're older, with different names, that came before, but the Bible used them. The first case of Noah, a character who was told to build a vessel and escape from the flood. There's actually many names for Noah. Utnapishtim, Ziasudra, Atrahasis. All are Noah characters from different cultures that recorded the same story, but with little details. But a God told a being to build a vessel, there's a flood coming, an impending disaster, save yourself and your family. Tales of resurrection. That means death and reborn. Destruction and deliverance. The first Messiah, that's the ideal king who comes to save us and lifts our whole society up. Funeral chants, and also lullabies to babies from their mothers. Sumerian proverbs are also pretty funny. I used to tell a lot of Sumerian proverb jokes. One of them was, man, first pleasure, marriage, I'm thinking it over, divorce. So they kind of had an idea into the modern futuristic world. So a lot of these, first, and this is an important one too, library catalogs. So the first time that books tablets were cataloged was in the Sumerian area. And they found, of course, many of the libraries of many kings. And so they found complete versions of complete documents. The mathematical system that the Sumerians used was called sexagesimal. Now in textbooks, if you read about the Babylonians, they'll tell you the Babylonians had a sexagesimal system, but they inherited it from the Sumerians. And that's the only line you're going to see in a textbook that gives the tribute to the Sumerians. Here's what's interesting about the sexagesimal system. They had a funny way of multiplying 6 times 10 times 6. So in this case, 6 times 10 is 60. 60 times 6 is 360. So they are the ones who created 360 degrees in a circle. But they also multiplied 6 out for several times. So 6 times 2 is 12. And that was a common number that they used a lot because of their sexagesimal, and 6 was easy to multiply. Well, guess what? How many months are there in a year? 12. How many disciples of Jesus? How many tribes of Israel? How many inches in a foot? Okay, here's a trick one. How many hours in a day? 24. 4 times 6. But do you know that it used to be double hours? In the ancient world, they used double hours, and it was 12 double hours. They were just longer. It got changed many thousands of years later. But we still use this system today. Does anybody here buy bagels or donuts? Okay, I have 10 fingers and 10 toes. I want to tell the baker to give me a group of 10. How do I tell them? How do you say group of 10? Don't we have base 10? You know you're going to buy a dozen, right? He's never heard the word for 10. It's a deca. Tell the baker you want a deca of donuts. He has never heard that before. He's familiar with a dozen. That's 2 times 12. This numbering system we're still using today. It's not metric. It doesn't come from fingers and toes. It comes from this gigantic, incredible, advanced mathematics that has no place in 3,000 to 4,000 BC civilization. Well, unless you believe what the ancients told you. This is one of Zechariah's graphs explaining what precession is. Precession is a wobbling of the axis of the Earth, regardless of what causes it. The wobbling of the Earth makes the zodiacal ages change every 2,160 years. And then we go through the different animals that we know about. Right now we're going from the age of Pisces, which, by the way, is why people have a fish if they have a symbol of Jesus on their car. It comes from the age of Pisces because he was the prophet who led the age of Pisces. But now we're going into the famous age of Aquarius. Okay? The Sumerians knew about these ages. And yet each age is 2,160 years, and the total cycle takes 25,920 years. But their civilization only existed for a couple thousand years. How could they possibly have known? They also had a way of describing the Earth's skies, and they called one of it Enlil had the northern skies, and Ea had the southern skies. And the way of Anu was described as a celestial band with the planet's orbit, the ecliptic. And here they are. Here's the names that the Sumerians used to describe the animal symbols that we use today to keep track of interstellar time. The bull is Goanna, the heavenly bull. This wasn't invented by the Greeks. Mashtaba, the twins, Galileo, Absin, whose father was Sin, that's the maiden Virgo. Every one of our zodiac symbols was already identified in 2000 to 3000 BC. And in Egypt, during the time of Aries, the statues start to become rams. In another era, the statues are bulls. So Egypt was already basing statues in their artwork on this zodiacal time and age, which they inherited from the older civilization here. Now this should not exist because supposedly they should not have known about these zodiacal age changes. They didn't have enough time. They supposedly didn't have the astronomy. Well, we're going to find out that lack of astronomy that we've been told is actually incorrect. This is one of the most incredible slides and pieces, and it's a little complicated, but I'm going to go through it. Professor H.P. Hilprecht had an article, and this is one page of several pages of extreme advanced mathematical calculations that make no sense whatsoever. Let me start with the first one. Up here is a 195 trillion, 955 billion, 200 billion number. And they're starting with 195 trillion and they're dividing that number down. Okay. Who needs to use 195 trillion when you're just worrying about getting your crops and eating and hoping that your daughter marries somebody who can support himself? What are they doing? Predicting the U.S. national debt 5,000 years ago? I never even dealt with the trillion numbers until the debt went there. And here they're starting this number. They don't start with 2 and multiply or 6 times 10. No, they go from this gigantic number and they multiply and divide downward. And here's another set of crazy numbers that divides downward. They start with 12,960,000 on this group. Okay? But it turns out that that sex-adjustable system and their way of doing things, well, guess what this is? Right here is 25,920. That number that I just mentioned was the years in one precessional cycle. Well, how the hell did they know that? 500 cycles is 12,960,000. For some reason, this mathematical tablet started the counting the numerator from 500 zodiac complete cycles, and then counted it down, 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 and divided it down. It's beyond imagining why and how, of course, unless you listen to what the ancients recorded. Because the king said, and the priest said, all that we learned from our gods, the Anunnaki. They did not take credit for it. The king may have gone to battle in a war, but he didn't take credit for this information. And back then in the ancient world, the information was astronomical. That was the special information, the cycles of the heavens and the moons, and the solstices, the equinoxes, and eclipses. That was the type of information that was highly held. So now we see that whatever information they leave behind, or pictures, there's a lot more going along with it, and they should not have known this. Even I don't think, I even tried to match some of these with the calculator to see if they were right. I found them a slight mistake in their calculation over there. I remember I mentioned that 3,600 year number was important. What Zecharia found was that all of these leaders, the Anunnaki leaders that were leaders on earth during the days before the flood, the time when the gods ruled, in Egyptian they call it Zeptepi, the time where the gods occupied, and it was a wonderful time. Each of these leaders was a leader based on a cycle of an orbit that was based on 3,600 years. The planet where these Anunnaki claim they came from had an average orbital period we figured out of 3,600 years. Now, an orbital period like that could be plus or minus 100, 200 years every time it comes around. So it's a mathematical average. But once again, guess what 3,600 is? It's 60 times 6 times 3 is 6 times 10, 360 times 10. It's the sex-adjustable system. So what this is saying is, Alulam was the king of Earth for 8 orbits of his planet. Well, that was only 8 years. But that to us is 28,800 Earth years. And it's funny because the stories of the ancient gods have them being virtually immortal. Well, time, does it really work differently if you're on a different planet, or if you're farther away from the gravitational source? NASA proved that it's true. They had 2 atomic clocks matched up. One went up on the shuttle, one stayed on Earth, and the one that went up in the shuttle became out of sync with the one that stayed on the Earth. It's possible that the farther you get away from the gravitational source, let's say the sun of this solar system, time can slow down. If you grew up and you evolved on a planet that had a 3,600 single year, this is only 10 years for you. If you live 100 years on your planet, to us that would be 360,000 years long. So it's quite possible if time does work that way, that these numbers are not fictitious, they're simply the recorded history, and it makes sense for them. Okay, this is a cylinder seal, which is about the size of this pointer, and it's a picture at an inverse, and it's rolled onto clay to become the cover of an envelope or a letter, but it always shows the owner's name, and then it shows a picture. Does anybody notice this? There is no other ancient picture that I can find that has Saturn's rings on it. It's the only one. I've looked at thousands of these, and I don't think Zecharia found another one either. Okay, they're just sitting around, drinking beer, having a good time. The Sumerians invented over 200 recipes of beer. Long straws. They like to drink them right from the keg. Yet, here we have in the background, they're a little buzzed, they're a little drunk. They're like, hey, let's go make some pictures of the sky. Well, you can't see Saturn's rings without binoculars. At least, 15 power? Maybe 12 power? You need a really good optical lens for this. And guess what? This is Jupiter. There's Mars. And this is Venus, and this is Earth and the Moon. Now, we know this is Venus because it's got 8 little waves of light coming out, 8 rays. The asteroid belt is actually right here where the straw is. Now, I don't know if they're trying to tell you that the asteroid belt is there, but that happens to be where they put the straw. So you start to see little things that creep up that are just, well, how did they know that? How did they get an observation of Saturn? How did they get the years of precession calculated exactly down so that they knew 500 cycles of it? Like I said, they said everything came from their gods. This is Cylinder Seal VA243. It's an East German museum. And it shows Enki, the god, who's giving the plow to mankind. Let's see, how old is it? It is 2500 BC, Akkadian, and notice first of all, we have 2 characters that have horned hats. These 2 are gods. This is a human, either a king or a priest king. Sometimes we talk about giants and we make a reference to, notice that Enki's sitting down. If he was standing up, he would probably be this tall, much taller. But notice the hands of this guy. The hands are in a giving position. They're showing motion on 2 dimensions because they're giving the plow to mankind. The king didn't claim this great invention of agriculture for himself. He recorded the history that he was given the plow by his god Enki, the lord of earth. Enki is a male name for the Lord, and Enki is the word for earth. His other name was also Ea, whose home is water, for some specific reasons. But once again, we wonder, okay, was the plow really given by a fictitious mythological alien god to humans? Okay, come on. Well, then they decide to throw in a little something extra to really reinforce the point that they're telling you the truth. Because up here, we have a depiction of something. So, what do you think it is? The solar system? Okay. When I was a kid, I used to draw the sun with rays like this to make it shine. Also, if you take out the sun, you'll notice that this is a Star of David. It's a 2-triangle pattern, which is one of the oldest depictions of the Star of David, although it's not just the lines, but it's one of the oldest we could find. But all of these objects here, this is our solar system depicted. Now what they're depicting is every object that has a god that's represented by one. So this is the Earth and the Moon. This is Venus and Mercury. Out here we have the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. We come back here to Saturn and Jupiter. This is an extra planet where we have the asteroid belt now, and that would be Mars. So I can identify every one of the common members of our solar system, including little Pluto that's been downgraded lately. And Zecharia used to say, just keep it the way the Sumerians had it. Keep Pluto in there. And then there's been other people, a professor of Griffith Park Observatory, E.C. Krupp, who tried to argue with Zach and said, oh, no, this isn't our solar system. This is the teapot, Jupiter and the teapot. The teapot is a constellation that British astronomers created because they drank tea in the afternoon. It wasn't it's a constellation that the ancients had. And then he said, no, it's not Jupiter. Okay, I'm just too hasty. You know what? They're showing another solar system. Zach said, what? Now you're saying the ancients were recording another solar system? That they even knew about other solar systems? Come on, give me a break here. So, this cylinder seal has a story from history, and in it, the scribe hid a little bit more information. The god must have said, hey, throw this little tidbit in. Don't worry, nobody will hurt you, you'll be all right. Nobody will care. And you have a representation of our own solar system written in 4,500 years ago. And I was never told once in any school that I went to that the ancients knew the sun was in the center. Everyone always teaches that the ancients thought the earth was the center of everything because the way you see an observation, it looks like everything goes around us. There was some Greeks who came to the conclusions and they were outvoted. Was it Hipparchus? Yeah, it was Hipparchus. His theory was thrown out. Sorry, it didn't comply with observational reality. And here's all the names that they use in Sumerian for these planets. What you don't see here is Earth. Because where the asteroid belt is, they put Tiamat. Okay? Tiamat is proto-Earth. Tiamat is a planet that was in the epoch of creation that was damaged and destroyed. And it was bumped into a new orbit, of which they say became the Earth along with the moon Kingu. So in their history, in the epoch of creation, I didn't have enough time to put all the slides in of that creation story, but I wanted to show you how all of the names of the planets, including Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, are all identified. Earth is kind of like a broken planet. If you think about how big the Pacific Ocean is, and you look at the land masses together, if you connect South America to Africa, which is like a puzzle piece, you really have more than half a planet without landmass. It has been damaged and scarred. And what actually did the damage to the proto-Earth was probably this planet that we've discussed, this Nibiru planet that came around every 3,600 years and did some kind of damage. Not always, but occasionally it did. So this is an example of what the solar system looked before Earth was in its place. Okay. Now we're getting back to another museum piece. Okay, the other one was in an East Asia museum, Cylinder Sylvier 243. This is called the Planisphere. This is in the British Museum. This, I think, is one of the most important pieces on Earth besides the one we just saw. This is the sketch diagram of this same thing here. This is, it's a little bit harder to describe it until you see it like this. We are going to look at a translation of this piece of the pie, but I want to comment on a few of the other things that are here. First of all, here looks like a shape of an ellipse. An ellipse is the true path that planets take around the sun. That was discovered by Kepler. Ellipse is a double foci orbital path. Okay? This is either Gemini or Orion or some maybe Cygnus, and it's pointing up here. Over here you have 3 intersecting arrows, and it's pointing here. Zecharia was once on the radio, I helped to get on the radio with Art Bell, with Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, who had discovered when he had a slight plane, not a plane crash, but he had to have a landing somewhere, where there were some ancient sites somewhere in Mexico, and they found there descriptions of 3-dimensional travel on a 2-dimensional surface. Of course, when we write on a piece of paper or you chisel on clay, it's 2 dimensions. This is describing 3-dimensional travel. This is how 3-dimensional travel works. You need coordinates. You need a combination of 3 sets of coordinates over there, meaning you draw a line, 1 coordinate here and here, and you draw a line, 1 here, and then you make 3 intersecting lines. And where you are is the starting point, or your destination point. So you need 7 coordinates to make 3-dimensional travel. And that's demonstrated here on this planisphere that's sitting in the British Museum. As far as I know, it's on their permanent display. It's always out there. So we're seeing some incredible stuff, and now we're going to see what Zecharia translated as that slice of the pie. First of all, I had mentioned already that a 8-pointed star was Venus, and why it was 8. We're going to find out now. In Sumerian and Akkadian, Kakab is an astronomical object. In Hebrew, Kohav is star, but it could be astronomical object. Zecharia translates this as directions, instructions for the orbital crew as they were approaching Earth. They came from a planet of mountains. The god Enlil went by the planets, and he went by Pluto, Uranus and Neptune, and Jupiter, and Saturn, and Mars, and he came to Earth. The only people who would call Earth the 7th planet are people or beings that came from the outside of our solar system and came in from the outside in towards the center. Because we consider ourselves the 3rd rock from the sun. Well, guess what? Over here, the way of Enlil, which is the northern skies, shows that map. The sun, Mercury, Venus, and the Earth. So down here, we do have a representation of the way we look at it. But over here, we have how many planets he passed. Now, Dilgon is Jupiter and Apin is Mars. There was course corrections on their way, which was the asteroid belt. So they had to make course corrections through there. So we're going to see symbols of 7 on the cylinder seals or on stelas, and for years, maybe hundreds of years, the archaeologists thought it was the 7 sisters, the Pleiades. Zecharia completely changed the paradigm of understanding, created a whole new way of looking at it by identifying 7 as Earth. And then everything else made sense. He once received some correspondence from a NASA engineer and said, "You got me. That's the one. Calling Earth the 7th planet is the only thing that makes sense. It has to be correct from the outside coming in." This took Zach 1 month to translate, just this piece here, because this is Akkadian cuneiform, but they're speaking in Sumerian. And this is one of my favorite pieces. This is a tomb of Hoi in Egypt. Like I said, the evidence is all over the world. Now, Hoi was the viceroy for Nubia and the Sinai. Okay? I personally looked up this picture in the Philadelphia Museum, the University Museum Library, which I've spent 3 full weeks there, just nonstop researching Zechariah's source material, looking at what's found in the reports, and I found the original drawing that this is based on from 1905 to 1910 of an archaeologist who went down there and he drew this out. What you have is one of the most incredible depictions ever. So we've seen depictions of the solar system. We saw Saturn, we saw some crazy numbers. Now we're seeing one thing above ground and something below ground. First of all, above ground is like similar to what we saw in the Victory Stela of Naram Sin. It's a conical object. Do you notice that these people are praying away from the object? It's too holy. It's a symbol of the gods. Don't look directly in their face. Don't look directly at it. Pray to it, revere it, but don't look at it. So they're praying away from it. Notice that this thing reminds me of a heat shield like they used to use in the Apollo space capsules, and yet this one is charred and scratched. It's not pristine. It's not a pristine, perfect object of the gods in perfect circular form and all perfect forms. No. It's actually used. And these, to me, look like straps that would hold on to heat shield. Yet the heat shield's been worked and used. And then we have this below ground setup. Well, these guys are, it's hard to even believe today. There's hoses here and they're doing maintenance. You're seeing technology. You're seeing a cleaning crew repairing and cleaning the rocket part of a spaceship to make sure it's functional so it'll take off. Yeah, it's even a Titan, any underground missile silo has a similar characteristic here for getting rid of exhaust. It gets dissipated sideways. And sometimes the exhaust may be taken by heat condensations. What's it called? Yeah, thank you. Because you don't want to poison the population around which may live the people who want to live by the gods. So this is, yeah, it's of the gods, but it's also technology. See, now we understand it. 150 years ago, when archaeologists saw it, they couldn't even imagine what it was. They didn't imagine rockets or space flight or even airplanes back then. So when this stuff was first found, they didn't know what to look at it. That's why Zechariah's new view of it changed the paradigm. Is this on? The lapel mic's not plugged in, right? Todd, you still have sound on me? Is it still working?
Yeah.
Okay. Craig, what's
7:05.
Okay, good. Let's see, 7:05, and we are only halfway done. Okay, and this is the shortened version, by the way.
You gotta present this again for again.
No, yeah, I can go back. That it was still at the house there.
Get you in as soon as I
No, how about the other mic? That one. I just want the recording to keep going.
Yeah.
Are you plugged in to record this?
Yeah.
Testing, is this one good? Yeah. Testing second mic, okay. Okay, so now we're seeing detailed technology, not just, somebody's imagination. The person who drew this saw the inside workings of what it was, and they drew as much detail as possible. Okay, now this is what we call space travel. Now, come on. Please, rockets, thousands of years ago in Egypt, symbols of our solar system when people shouldn't have known it. Got it? Well, if that's the case, then we should also see a description of the events, not just pictures. Because what I started to tell you was, We see texts and we see pictures. So is there evidence of something like this? Something being launched? And you know you're going to need a lot of firepower to get out of the atmosphere and escape velocity. So we found that too. That's in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is the oldest literary tale that there's complete versions of, and complete is 16 tablets in different languages. This section here that I pulled out is, he's thinking he's having a dream. Gilgamesh is on a trip with Enkidu to find the place where the gods go up and down because he wants to petition to become like them. He says here, "Friend, did you call me? Why am I awake? Why are my limbs paralyzed?" The heavens cried out, earth roared, daylight vanished, and darkness issued forth, lightning flashed, fire broke out, clouds swelled, it rained death. The glow disappeared, the fire went out, and all that had fallen turned to ashes. Does that describe a rocket launch? Is any part of Gilgamesh's description inconsistent with a rocket launch? He doesn't have it in the wrong order, he has it in the correct order. He thought, oh my God, hell's coming over on me, and then he survives. Every single piece of his description matches exactly what you would expect from the real technology. That's what's so fantastic about it. And Gilgamesh is dated to 2500 BC to 3300 BC, depending on how old it is. It's found in so many different forms. Oh, we're going to get there. I always like to start Baalbek with this. This is me in Malta, one of those above-ground temples. Now they had 23. There was 24th because the one was underwater, sorry, to match, the same sexagesimal system. All of their temples are designed with center holes so that something can fly down the middle and it won't affect anybody on the outside. They all have the same type of design. They're also aligned to solstices or equinoxes. This is Gigantea. One of the biggest stones I could find on Malta. Now, who thinks that's a big stone? Anybody? I know you don't. Isn't one person here give me a big stone, please? Okay, there you go in the audience right there. Thank you. Yeah, that's a big stone. I felt pretty small. But for people who build with gigantic stones, like we flip petals into a river, that's a big stone. Yeah, that's Baalbek, Lebanon. 1.5 miles is the quarry from where 3 of these giant trilliton stones are actually in place on a gigantic stone platform. But this is 30 people or 35 people in front of one stone sticking out of the quarry. Who's going to work with stones this big? What's the point? Even here, you see that they have smaller pieces and little pieces all around, right? Why the gigantic stones? Unless it's so easy for you to do it, why not? If you're going to launch rockets, and you're going to have exhaust and flames and things that could kill people, and you want to protect the population, you need stone. Now, you're not going to come to Earth and build yourself like what we do with NASA, build yourself a framework for launching. Because if you come to Earth with tools, you'll use the natural resources that we have. Stone was created from the heat of the Earth. Stone, volcanic stone, all these things they're not susceptible to heat because they were created in heat. Now, here's where 3 of these gigantic pieces are in place, okay, up here. It's not even at the bottom level. The bottom level has miniature little ones, a few tons. This is more like a few hundred tons. Up here! They had to put them up there really high up. How'd they get them up there? We can't even lift these things today except up and down. It's 1,100 tons each one. 3 of them are in place. Baalbek is the biggest stone platform in the world, and the Roman Empire had the biggest temple to Jupiter on this platform in their whole empire. What they did was the Romans would adopt ancient sites that were holy to the people that they conquered, put up their gods in their temples, and adopt their religion. This is Wally, I think. He looks so small, but the funny thing is that whoever worked with these giant stones had no problem moving it from here, 1.5 miles, bringing it here, and then putting it up on this level. Of course, the people of the area say the giants did it. That's their folklore, that's their story. Well, somebody did it because it's always been part of history. There's never been a time in history where Baalbek did not exist. It has always been there. And this is a picture from, we call it the Biblis coin. We think shows Baalbek's platform, and again, another one of these objects, cone-shaped, on top of the platform. Being ready for either launch. Oh yeah, launch. And it looks like the Temple of Jupiter too. So we see again, you have a story of a rocket launching. You have a picture of a rocket, an example. You have a stone platform that's real. All of these things you can go, well, you can't go see Baalbek yourself. It's a little dangerous these days. You have to wait for some kind of peace agreement. And now we go back to pictographic writing. This is the word Dingir. Dingir means righteous ones of the gear, or holy ones of the gear. The din symbol is this, the gear is this. The din word is that word like mujahideen, holy warrior. In Hebrew, Beit Din is a courthouse, a house of judgment. The word Eden, from Garden of Eden, E is the word house in Sumerian. E became Bet, or Bayet, from Sumerian to Akkadian. Eden, which in the Bible is a garden, is actually the name of where every God lived in every city that was his home precinct. Every city may have had an Eden. In the Eden, the house of judgment or the courthouse, the king or the priest king would come up to the god and ask him questions. You know, what do we do here? What do we do there? So din is that word, justice, righteous, judgment, holy. Gear means flashy, fiery object, flashy, fiery. You know what this word meant after it became from pictographic to cuneiform? The first time it was translated? That's the first time in history, ladies and gentlemen, that the word God appeared. The first time the word God appeared in writing, it was a mistranslation from this picture symbol. Because the old writing before cuneiform and letters was pictographic. So when you look at the tablets of the Syrian and Babylonian, it says Dingir and Lil. It means the god Enlil, but what it really meant was the righteous one of this fiery object, or what we would call astronaut. And here's a Sumerian language textbook that I showed to Zecharia, and he almost fell off the phone when I told him about this, and he couldn't believe it because, and this goes back to 1984, I believe. Yep. In 1984, this Sumerian language book already adapted the gear and Zechariah's definition for the word. The gear word means to flash like lightning. So that word for God really meant people that traveled in this fiery object. Okay, now this is a progression of how the languages and the words changed through thousands of years so that I could show it to you in a visual form. So Dingirs, pure or righteous ones of the gear, the fiery object, the sky chamber. There was two types of these Dingir. Anunnaki are the gods of, let's say, the leading council, the leaders, those from heaven to earth came. Anu is heaven, Na, they came to Ki, to earth, Anunnaki. Those who from heaven to earth came. There was a group of astronauts that were called Igigi. Igigi is translated as those who watch and see. In Hebrew, the term from Igi turns into Iri. So Ga becomes a Ra. So ear is the word for eye. In Sumerian, it's Igi. So Igi becomes Iri because in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they have watchers. The watchers are called the Iri. In Sumerian, the Igigi were the watchers. Later on, when the languages changed from Sumerian to the Akkadian to Semitic, they changed the word from Dingir to Ilu, Ilani, or Luti. So in the text it says, Ilu and Lil, Ilu Inanna did something, was thankful for some gift to the temple. So they're telling you that these are the lofty ones, and they actually meant lofty, lifted up, beings that were higher above. In Hebrew, these terms here turn into El, Aloha, and Elohim. And Elohim is a big discussion point, whether it's singular or plural, and in fact it is plural. It means gods, because when Elohim is used in the Bible, it refers back to old stories where there was multiple gods, but they're combining the literature so that they're bringing it down into, it's like a compound character. In certain movie scripts, you may have 4 characters, but you put all the attributes into one to make it easier. The Bible does the same thing by editing down some of the older stories, and it makes any stories with the Sumerian gods into Elohim. El Eloha are singular forms of God from Hebrew. And then also in Hebrew we have from the Bible, B'nai Ha-Elohim, which is children of the gods, also in plural. So what you're getting is the progression of the word where God came from and where it started. See, that's why you have to go back to where that started. Because if you just look in the English, you'll see Lord. And then you'll see God. In Hebrew, you have many names for them. Abraham called El Shaddai God. Then he called El Elyon. Moses ran into Ayeh Asher Ayeh, which is Yahweh. Each of these is a different name in Hebrew. But in English, it just has one or two words. Anunnaki was the name of their gods. Enki was one of their chief gods. In Hebrew, the word for giant comes from the Anunnaki Enki word. Anak, Anaki, Anakim. Anakim is plural. Enki and Anak or Enki is the same thing. If I say En or An, it's not, the accent is not that important. It's the harder letters, the consonants, the N-K-I sound. The word Anunnaki, which means those who from heaven to earth came, was kept in Hebrew by the word Nephilim, the fallen ones, which is where the term fallen angels came from. Because it has the same meaning as Anunnaki. Those who from heaven to earth came are the fallen ones. That's the meaning of the word. Hebrew also picked up the sound of Anunnaki and turned that sound into the word giants. So Hebrew comes later, and through Phoenician and through the Semitic Akkadian, keeps the words that have been used for thousands of years that the people are used to. These people at this time had already culture for thousands of years. They knew stories. They had sounds, words, memories. They were not forgotten. They were incorporated. Rephaim is actually a type of giant that the Bible mentions that occupied some area when Joshua wanted to go into Israel with the Israelites. Rephaim in modern Hebrew is the word ghost. Ghost. They still kept the word Rephaim, but it doesn't have its original meaning. So what I'm showing you here is how one word in one language, Anunnaki and Enki, carries down the sound, and also the meaning is carried into a different form. And that's what happens with Hebrew a lot in the Bible. It carries some sounds, some meanings, it crisscrosses, incorporates, and it constantly does that. Okay, now we get into the biblical parallels. One of the stories the Sumerians wrote about is why people were created. Why were humans created in the first place? In the Bible, we were created to work in the Garden of Eden. Actually, that's an edited down version. This is a cylinder seal from Israel. It's in the Bible Lands Museum. Seal 377. It says here God's building a tower. They actually have this misidentified as being the source of the Tower of Babel. But I was there talking to one of the directors named Joan Westenholz, and she was literally arguing to change the description in the book of the museum, to change this to the gods complaining that they were doing the work. The Anunnaki were complaining that they did all the work. Why? Didn't come to earth to be workers and miners and do manual labor. So the answer was, let's create a primitive being. But the impetus was that was a strike. The Anunnaki, or the Igigi, the ones that did the work, went on strike. This cylinder seal depicts that event. That's why they're throwing their hands up. And here's the language in Atrahasis, one of the oldest stories of the description of how to create people and what we're created for. Let man bear the loads of the gods. Create a mortal. Let him bear the yoke. Let him bear the work of the gods. Now this is the important part where the Bible borrows some of their language and adopts the story. Nintu shall mix clay. In Hebrew, clay is Adamah. With his flesh and his blood. Flesh is skin, right? And the muscle. Blood is dam. So in Hebrew, dam is blood, but clay is Adamah. Then a god and a man will be mixed together in clay. They created a hybrid being. A hybrid being of their DNA and whatever DNA they used, which was primitive man, I suppose, will be mixed together in clay. Let a ghost come into existence from the god's flesh. The great Anunnaki who assigned fates, didn't he mix clay with flesh and blood? How does this parallel the Bible story? Very simply. Right here, God formed man from the dust of the ground. And he blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and he became a living being. That's the same way of saying this. Let a ghost come into existence to create the life. The Bible picks up the same story and the same concept. And of course, here's the command, let's make man in our image and our likeness, as if God is speaking to a council. Not to himself, but to a group of beings. Which is similar to Atrahasis, where they're talking in a group form, let's create a primitive mortal man. It's the same concept. You've got a council of beings discussing creating a being for the work of loads, and then this idea of breathing into the being to create the living form is exactly what the Bible picks up. Of course, the Atrahasis story is thousands of years before the Bible story. And here's the physical evidence, the picture of what it looks like when they describe when humans were created. The first man was Adamah, Adam. This is Ninti, the mother goddess. This is Enki, the same one who gave the plow. The chief scientist. Lo and behold, I can't believe it, but Enki is literally holding up a test tube. Yep, correct. And this is the birth months, the tree of life, right? In the other text of Atrahasis, she says, my hands have made it, I have created it. In real time. She's saying, I'm the one who did it. This guy is mixing a pot of clay, and there's flasks on the wall that's showing different formulas. This is more technology being shown, again, in a picture form. But yet the story is the Bible story. But this is the root of it, because the Bible has a bibliography. And here's the part of where the Bible talks about, where we've discussed the giants. This is the prelude before the flood. The reason I bring this one up is to show you that there was the reason for why the flood was given. Okay? It came to pass when man began to increase upon the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of the rulers. In Hebrew, that says sons of the gods. It's mistranslated in English on purpose. They saw that daughters of man were good. They took themselves wives from whoever they chose. Okay? The Nephilim were in the earth in those days. Now, for hundreds of years, King James Bible said the giants were in the earth in those days. Only recently, since Zechariah's books, I believe, they started to get back to the word Nephilim, which is the fallen ones. Okay? The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also afterwards when the sons of the rulers, again, B'nai Ha-Elohim, children of the gods, would consort the daughters of man, who would bear to them. They were mighty men from Olam. It says here men of devastation. It's a mistranslation of the Hebrew again. It says Anshe Hashem in Hebrew, which we think means men of this rocket ship, or men of this Dingir object. The purpose of this is why the flood was given according to the Bible is because these hybrid beings were becoming too populated. Too many of them. Apparently God didn't like it. There was too much consultation of these sons of gods and the daughters of men. Apparently they were having children and having wives and families, and it just wasn't very tasteful. Them. But what happens after the flood is another place where we see where the Bible borrows from the older sources. Because, first of all, the flood is different in the Bible and from these old documents. Gilgamesh has the flood as a 7-day thing. Over here, in the Bible, the dove is the last bird to get a branch or doesn't come back. In the Mesopotamian story, it's the raven. The raven is the last one who doesn't come back, and that's how they know to get out of the ark. But over here, it says here, the gods smelt the fragrance, the gods smelt the pleasing aroma. They gathered like flies over the offerings. That's the offering that Noah did. Or in this case, it was Sidra, who made an offering after they got out of the ark, and the gods were hungry and ready to eat, and so they smelled a pleasing fragrance. Okay, then why would God, the creator God of the Bible, care about meat being cooked? He wasn't a consumer of flesh. He didn't eat animals. But here, Hashem is the name of the God in Hebrew. Hashem smelled the pleasing aroma. It's a direct copying of the older story. The line was so good, those scribes just couldn't take it out. They just loved it. I mean, it was around for thousands of years. Why were they going to edit out that part? It was such a good line. Okay? There's also prohibition here about, God says he won't destroy the earth anymore, and a whole bunch of other things about killing other people, which is not allowed. It's a different part of the lecture. The thing I wanted to just emphasize here is the creation story of man, which is borrowed from the older stories, and then you have the end of the flood, which is also a copy from the story. Okay? And here's another version, Atrahasis. The reason, again, they were watching. Ninti was weeping over the humans that were dying. Okay? The gods smelt the fragrance. They gathered like flies over the offering. All they had eaten, and it was for 7 days and 7 nights. And there's a picture of her looking as the humans were being killed and flooded. She was looking out of the capsule of the Benbet. Correct. In Egyptian, this Benbet image of a ghost, a god, peering out is very common. And it could indicate the picture form of this story of Ninti weeping and looking out and watching what's happening and crying as her favorite humans, her creation, were dying in the flood. Inanna, the first bikini model in history, also known as Ishtar. Now we're going to go a little fast here because we don't have a lot of time, but we are going to get them all in. Inanna Ishtar, goddess of love, war, seductress. Not every lover escaped her lair to the next morning. So when she was scored, she was not very happy. Inanna was angry sometimes. And in the case of this story, you know what she did? She took the wells of the land and she turned them to blood. All the groves and gardens of the land she satiated with blood. These slaves could drink nothing but blood. Doesn't that sound familiar to anybody? Isn't that what happened in the plagues of Moses? When he turned the river, it became foul. Egypt could drink nothing because it was all blood. Now, the first stories I showed you were from the beginning of the Bible, from Genesis, creation of humans being borrowed, the flood story being borrowed. Now we have the plagues of Moses, a much later story with borrowed pieces and details. And here's how Moses' birth story is borrowed from Sargon the Great, king of Acadia, which are several thousand years apart. Sargon is from 2200 BC. Moses is allegedly 1250 BC. They were both born in secret, put into a basket, covered with pitch, allowed to float in the river, and found by a noble person and raised to be a prince or a king. The same birth story. So here we have a significant problem with the Bible borrowing its mythological stories from older cultures. Not only the beginning Genesis parts, but also later on. This is a ram with his thorns caught in a thicket, which is a story from Abraham before he sacrifices Isaac. An angel comes down and he's told to stop, and they find a ram and they sacrifice it. This was found in the royal tomb of Ur, along with a mass burial gravesite of 72 or more bodies, including Adin Puwabi, who was a queen at the time, and her husband, but those bones and her skeletal structure are in the British Museum. Her headdress is in Philadelphia. This piece is in the Philadelphia Museum. This is what the Goddess or Genome Project is about. It's about the bodies that were found in this royal cemetery, and they want to study the bones to see if they can find any DNA in them that's not directly human. The project is ongoing. They're still in the exception phase if the university is going to be accepting the research job and take the bones from the British Museum. So that's where it's at right now. We're still kind of in an interim phase. It's another example of an old piece of artwork appearing inside later on. This is from the Book of Giants in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It mentions Gilgamesh in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's out of time. It should not happen. Also here you have Nephilim mentioned separately from giants. And a whole bunch of other stories. There's other slides with that as well that we don't have time for. But the fact is, if Gilgamesh is mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls, something's wrong with the dating. Because Gilgamesh is thousands of years earlier than anything the Dead Sea Scrolls are supposed to be. And here we have Hammurabi and Shamash. Shamash is one of the gods whose name means the sun in Hebrew. Literally studying with Hammurabi, discussing in person what the law codes are. Crime and punishment. And a lot of the Hammurabi law codes are the same as the Moses. An eye for an eye. If somebody kills your ox, you kill their ox. A lot of those rules are directly copied from there. But what I wanted to show you was, when they say that we got the information from our gods, they didn't just create it and talk about it. They depicted it as a real life event. And there's the king in real deep meditative thought and conversation with the god, trying to get down the rules. This is the beginning of part 2 of Zechariah's Best Evidence. This is from Atlantis of Tula, Mexico. What he's showing is this little guy has a little tool that's a mining tool, a little piece of technology shown in the modern world. Those are the Earth Chronicle books from Zechariah. There's obviously another 10 books after this, but these are the original 6, 7 of them in those old hardcover books. Any of them tell the story of what happened on planet Earth in more detailed form than I could do in 90 minutes. Oh, that's mine. Look, the philosophy is simple. If a person believes in the Bible, then I think to be consistent, you have to believe in the source material of the Bible. If you don't believe in anything, it's fine. It doesn't matter then. But some of the stories are true. And the stories that are true were borrowed. And a lot more information was in those stories. Because in Atrahasis, there's 7 tablets of creation. The Bible has a couple paragraphs. The flood story is many, many pages of text. In the Bible, it's a few chapters. There's a lot more information in the older, full versions of these edited down stories that the Bible uses. So to check out our true history, you have to go a little bit deeper and a little bit older. But this is the basis of some of, just touching on the edge of some of Zechariah's best evidence. Thank you very much.